Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us about their journey as a writer. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Our special guest today is Dayna Lorentz, the author of Wayward Creatures and Of a Feather. Both are published by Clarion Books HarperCollins Children's Books. The No Safety in Numbers trilogy has been published by Speak Penguin Random House, while Scholastic has published the Dogs of the Drowned City trilogy. Dayna's books have received some impressive recognition over the years. No Safety in Numbers was selected by the Young Adult Library Services Association, YALSA, as a 2013 quick pick for reluctant readers. And the second book in the trilogy, No Easy Way Out, was a Barnes & Noble bestsellers pick for teens. Of a Feather was a finalist for the 2021 New England Book Award for middle grade and was a 2023 Magnolia Book Award nominee for grades 6 through 8. Wayward Creatures, one of my latest favorite books, has won the 2023 NCTE Charlotte Huck Award for Outstanding Fiction for Children and is a nominee for the 2023-24 Sunshine State Young Readers Award for grades 6 through 8. Having grown up and attended high school in Ridgewood, New Jersey, Dayna received her undergraduate degree from Williams College in Massachusetts, her law degree from Fordham University in New York, and an MFA in creative writing and literature from Bennington College. The FlyingPigBooks.com website states that Dayna, quote, was an uprising lawyer in New York City. Writing had been her hobby, but she realized she wanted to turn it into a job. Dayna's other hobbies include singing, opera, and drawing, unquote. PenguinTeen.com tells us that Dayna, quote, is a part-time cupcake enthusiast, unquote. Dayna is also presently a staff attorney for the Vermont Criminal and Family Trial Courts. She resides in Burlington, Vermont, with her loving husband, her 2 children, and her family's 2 cats. It gives me great pleasure to welcome author and nature lover Dayna Lorentz to join us for An Author's Journey today. Welcome, Dayna.
Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Before we begin our interview, I'd like to make a request on behalf of our listeners and me as well. Would you kindly explain your enthusiasm for cupcakes? How did this all come about?
Well, first of all, who's not enthusiastic about cupcakes?
Okay, then.
They are a wonderful, small, personal dessert. They all are like a little gift of flavor. You can have multiple different flavors of cupcakes on your plate at any given time, as opposed to a cake, which is just one thing. You can have like 3 different types of cupcakes. And also they are, a wonderfully apportioned between cake and icing. You can take the bottom of the cupcake off and put it on top of the cupcake and make a little cupcake sandwich, and it's just sort of the perfect dessert.
That sounds like a page out of a book. Very well done.
I can go on and on about cupcakes.
Okay, so let's get into the writing then. Dayna, your background seems to be one that is far from traditional. Not many YA authors seem to start out as lawyers. I understand that, as we said earlier, after earning your law degree, you worked at a major law firm and as a federal law clerk, but you decided to pursue your passion for writing by earning a master's degree in the fine arts at Bennington College. And now you're writing books and practicing law. It seems that a good lawyer must also be a good writer, and sometimes an even better storyteller when trying to influence a judge or a jury, or maybe just explain something a lot more clearly. What's your strategy for connecting the skills of a lawyer with those of a writer?
Well, I think that you kind of nail it there with this idea of like both story and clarity. I think that, being a good, advocate for someone is really being able to give them a story that's compelling, making their point a compelling story for the judge. And that story has to be sort of in line with whatever the law of a particular case is. But it is making that a compelling narrative behind sort of the legal argument, that the cold legal argument with sort of this heart of what's compelling. So there is this aspect of story that connects the law with creative writing, but I think there's also that aspect of clarity. As a staff attorney, what my job is I work for the judges within the family and trial courts, and family and criminal courts, and I'm helping them research and write their opinions. I'm helping them answer the questions that are presented by the parties in various motions, or in a case. And my job is really to help clarify what are the real questions, what's really at stake here, and what are the answers, and how do the facts line up with the law of any case. And being really clear, both in your thinking about what's going on and in your writing about what's going on, is incredibly important as a lawyer. And I think that also is incredibly important as a creative writer. You want to be really getting at, like, not just, well, my character felt sad about, some stuff going on. You want to make sure, like, well, sad how? Sad why? Sad which way? How are they expressing that sadness? And what stuff? I think stuff is one of those words that packs a lot inside of it, and the job of the author is to pull that out. Especially, it can get really hard when you're writing in the voice of a kid, because a kid is going to say, "Well, I got stuff going on." And how do you make that stuff really clear for the reader? How do you put that in clear language? That's really the job of the author. But I think the other piece that's really neat is, as a lawyer, you move from case to case, and every case is going to be new people, new facts, new things to learn about. And that's the same wonderful aspect of being an author. For someone who really likes to learn about new things, being a lawyer presents an opportunity to go from, a case that's all about, the physics of car accidents, or, how to evaluate a certain business, or, what really is the emotional harm of a certain situation. You move from these kind of very unique situations and have to learn a whole new thing with each case. And that's true for every book I write. I do so much research into all sorts of weird stuff for my books. For Dogs of the Drowned City, I was researching, how would a dog actually navigate an elevator? What are the protocols for evacuations during hurricanes? In No Safety in Numbers, I was researching what weapons could you make in a Home Depot that would be most effective in defending yourself in a mall? And for Wayward Creatures, I did a lot of research both into restorative justice, but also into forest fires, into animal rehabilitation, the life of the coyote, the life of the opossum. It's just wonderful the way you can sort of your writing and your creativity can sort of take you in all these interesting directions, and you can follow your interests in putting a book together.
I think that's part of the beauty of your writing, that you do the research, you take the time, and you don't limit yourself to just one subject area, but you understand that all the subject areas are interrelated at one time or another. And something that I wish we could make even more clear in the schools. The great ones do this probably the best, though none of us, I think, has found the secret formula yet. But getting kids to understand that all of the knowledge that you learn, you may not apply it now, but there'll be a time somewhere in the future that even if you don't apply it directly, there may be something in the way you acquired that knowledge, or the process and procedure that you were taught to apply the knowledge, that will actually become quite important in an area that you never expected before.
Definitely. I mean, you can't be curious about something if you don't know what it is. And I think, there are things that can be obviously things to be curious about. Like, for example, yesterday we had a total solar eclipse in the sky over my house. Um, but if you don't know about it, how do you know that you're not interested in it? And I think, the more you learn and the more you're sort of interested, the more you sort of go digging around. I have to say that's the one thing I have a lot of bad things to say about, the internet and the influence of social media or YouTube on kids. But one of the really cool things is that, sometimes, YouTube shorts will go by, and my son will suddenly pick up a new interest in something that, we've never even thought about or talked about, like professional yo-yoing. It just showed up in his YouTube stream, and suddenly he's like, oh, wow. And he can go research that. He can find more videos. He can look it up on the internet, and he can, you know, ask for a yo-yo, and then suddenly he's doing all these crazy tricks that came out of nowhere. I have no skills with a yo-yo. But, um, you know, finding things like being open to the possibility of being curious and being interested in things. That's a inherent skill in being a lawyer, in being a writer, and I think also in being a kid.
And it probably extends to just about all the other things that we do too, though we don't tend to think about that a lot. As a society, we put a lot of pressure on our kids to be ready and be academic and pursue this area or that area. And many times it's not because parents are being aggressive or unreasonable, but they want the best for their kids. And it's nice to find that parent who understands that being the best for your kid is to sometimes helping your kid through a failure rather than helping your kid to totally avoid a failure. Um, Sometimes if you're too protected, you end up in the court system.
Well, yeah, and I think, if sometimes if you don't allow yourself the possibility of failure, you can keep yourself from be feeling brave enough to explore something new and something that doesn't exactly feel safe. I mean, I think there's some things that maybe you definitely shouldn't explore, like setting fire
Yes.
to your community park. But I think that there does need to be room for that exploration, for taking the chance on something new, because it's not always going to work out. I've gone out and researched books and put together, spent months and years, even years, writing books that didn't end up becoming books. They're just manuscripts in a drawer. They didn't come together in the right way. But I learned something through every one of those processes. And I think having that possibility of saying, okay, this book didn't work. Why didn't it work? Exploring that failure, interrogating that experience. I learned as much from that as I do from putting together a successful book.
I'm going to build on what you're saying and mention that in a conversation with Tui Sutherland, you mentioned that you were actually afraid of birds during your childhood, but your children have actually brought you closer to owls. So you've made kind of a realization. How did all that come about?
Well, I have to say, birds, their eyes, they're very cold. You can see the dinosaur when you look at a bird, especially like, for example, a chicken. You really get the dinosaur poking through. And there's this little farm. It's a beautiful place up here where I live. And I would take my daughter there because it was just great. They had a little farm stand. You could buy lunch. You could spend the day there, and it would be a great place for kids to play. And the chickens, though, would wander free. And so I'd be trying to feed my daughter lunch, and these chickens would come out of nowhere and just steal pieces of her sandwich. And so I gained this sort of antagonistic relationship with birds. That sort of fed into that early fear. But my daughter loved them, and she loved those chickens that were stealing her stuff. She loved, just sort of especially owls. And so we would go to visit owls in rehabilitation centers. We would watch, videos of nests. You can get live feeds of nests from the Audubon Society and just watch owls in the wild. And I became just absolutely fascinated by them through watching her and her fascination. And the more you learn about owls, the more fascinating they are. And just having that kind of intimate knowledge of something that seems so mysterious. It's a sign. I mean, great horned owls are known as the tigers of the sky. They kind of will eat anything. They're apex predators. They've been known to attack bald eagles. And they basically jump on you and kill you while you're asleep in your nest. I mean, they're kind of like these sort of assassins of the night. And these kind of terrifying birds, making them, you can see that, watch their families in their nest. You can watch them take care of their young. You can watch these little owlets fighting with each other for food. It creates the story just started happening for me, and I became really, really attached to them. So I think that, the more you look at nature, the more it becomes compelling, certainly for me. For example, I put a bird feeder out because we had all these birds in the yard and everybody else had a bird feeder. And I was like, all right, we'll put a bird feeder out. And then suddenly, my kids and I we can't stop watching. You're like, what is that bird on the bird feeder? And we had this, moment the first year we had the feeder out there where it was like, what is this little brown bird with black striped wings? We were like, we couldn't figure out what it was. We pull out the nature guides. We're trying to figure out who this is. It's not a sparrow. It looks kind of like a finch. And then the brown birds turned yellow, and we realized they were goldfinches. And
Wow.
it was just this wonderful realization. And, my kids and me, we were just so excited. We finally knew what this bird was. We learned that they change their plumage over, between the winter and the spring. And it was just thrilling. And, suddenly backyard became this, site of this adventure and exploration, just from a bird feeder. Um, so
Learning
yeah, I
can
think,
happen.
yeah,
Go
the
ahead.
learning happens, if you're curious about something, the wonder and the magic is right out the window.
And that's something that we should never forget, that there are learning opportunities everywhere, even in the kitchen.
Oh
Moms
yeah.
and dads cooking with their kids, making cupcakes or whatever they're happen to be making. There's measurements. There's clarity in directions.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
there's being part of a team and following those directions.
I think that cooking with your kids is always an exciting adventure because you learn that sometimes they have very natural abilities in some areas and not so many natural abilities in others.
And when you write your stories, uh, how do you make a choice of what audience you're going to be uh, creating this piece for? Do the audiences vary? Do you constantly try to write mainly for the young adult audience, or are you looking sometimes, well, I've got this idea, so maybe I'll try lower in age range or higher in age range? Maybe I'll try to write a book for adults.
Definitely. I mean, I think that my attraction to writing for sort of this middle grade, sort of like young teen voice really was the voice that was most compelling when I sat down to write. Like, I my MFA is actually in adult fiction. I've worked on adult pieces, and the most compelling characters in my adult pieces were sort of the teen characters. They were the kids, and so that was sort of the voice that was really the most authentic for me, where I was really getting, I think, the most connection with my readers. And so I think these are also compelling stories, coming of age stories, stories about those first discoveries of, you know, I'm feeling angry, I'm making choices, I'm making big choices in my life. Those are incredibly compelling stories. And I think, a third piece is, so it's my natural, like, sort of where I sort of uh, gravitated to in terms of voice, in terms of both then how compelling these types of stories are, but there's also just the audience. I think it's incredibly compelling to be writing stories for my kids. I was writing these books, sort of in advance of my children, but to be handing to my kids, I was looking at my kids' lives, seeing what they were going through, and wanting to write stories for them, and for them to have when they sort of were going to be able to get them. And for myself at that age, what are the stories that I would have been really excited to read about. So I think all of those three things sort of drove me to write to this age group. Now, I mean, Dogs of the Drowned City was sort of aimed at a younger audience. No Safety in Numbers is definitely an older story. It gets very intense and feels very teen to me. And then these books, Of a Feather and Wayward Creatures, these really were, sort of trying to get at that in between age, between sort of like a younger audience and that sort of fully, high school teen audience, to get at that transitionary, all of the transitions that happen sort of in that middle school, sort of late elementary school, early high school period.
Now, as a child, did you read a lot?
I did read a lot. And I think what's funny is I read a lot of things all over the place. I loved it was funny when the movie Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret came out. I hadn't remembered how much I loved that book, and my mom actually recalled for me. She was like, "Oh my god, when that book came out, you were crazy about that book. You carried it around with you." And so I think it's interesting how, like, you can sort of forget the importance of certain books. They just sort of become a part of you. So, for example, I loved A Secret Garden. I think that book, I remember reading it. I had this beautiful copy of it that had these sort of little, like, watercolor paintings in it. And I reread that book to my daughter sort of after I had finished Of a Feather. And I realized there's this moment, the first moment, where Mary meets the robin. And there's this sort of wonderful exchange with her and the robin in the garden because she's asking the robin to help her sort of find the secret garden. And I'm reading the book to my daughter, like, wait a minute, this is like almost exactly the same emotional journey that I tried to put on the page in terms of when Renee first experiences falconry with her aunt and her experience of having the hawk fly up onto her fist. I had just sort of transposed that emotional excitement and the wonder and the magic of having this like intimate relationship with this little creature of nature, which feels so you don't think you're going to be able to communicate with a robin. You don't think you're going to have this connection with a hawk or with an owl, and to have that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, we're really connecting. The magic and excitement of that. It was like that had sort of gotten into my literary DNA and then sort of come out in my expression of that same emotional moment.
It's interesting that we were chatting before about the solar eclipse and how uh, there were so many different reactions to folks who were outside watching. I unfortunately had to watch on TV because it was cloudy where I am, so I didn't
Oh
get
no.
to see a whole lot. But the reports that were coming from the people on site said that there were people who were just mesmerized. There were some who were crying. There were some who were just kind of giggling to themselves or smiling. Some were hugging. It just affected people different ways. And to hear you talk about the books that have impacted you so much connects me directly with that experience that those folks had, where you don't expect maybe that type of reaction to happen, but when it happens, you greatly appreciate it.
I think that's just I mean, that's also the magic of these books written for young people. I think that as a young person, you are you maybe you don't expect a book to touch you or to reach you in this sort of magical way. And it can, a lot of times you're coming at books, especially when you're sort of older, it's a book handed to you in school and you're interacting with the book purely as like, I got to produce some homework or I'm going to have a test on this. And it's really once you only when you're encountering a book out of those environments, or maybe not only, but when you're encountering a book on your own, like when you're reading it in your room, when you're reading it with your parent, when you're, reading it, outside of school, that you have the where you open yourself up to that possibility of the book really touching you and giving you that sort of magical connection because it's there. And I think, it's so exciting for me when I read a book and it's something new. It's, there's just a turn of phrase that was just unexpected, where it captures some emotion in this way that just feels perfect to me. When there's a scene that just resonates, where there's something that's just truly funny. I remember a book, it was not an award winner. I remember it was something I picked up off a paperback shelf somewhere, but there was a description of the character looking at someone and having owl eyes, and I distinctly remember laughing for an entire afternoon. I could not get over this one little description in the book, and that was just magical. And this was a book I was a kid in elementary school. I was not reading this as a part of any school project, but it just got you and got me. And I think that's just that's the wonder. That's what we're all looking for, right? The total solar eclipse, we can drive there, we can see it, we know it's coming. But the magic of a book is you don't know it's coming. You can pick up any book and find, like that total solar eclipse of of emotion or prose, and have that same kind of like, oh my gosh, just got to put it down and be like, that was a perfect moment, perfect literary moment.
When I was in high school, I remember reading One Day in the Life of um, Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I was a finicky eater back then. And after getting through about 100 pages, I think I was a bit less finicky because there were people who had nothing. They had maybe a bowl of clear liquid that passed for soup, and if there was a fish bone or a scale or a piece of anything in there, that was reason to celebrate. Uh, so there is a perspective, and
Oh, definitely.
making that connection to the reading is critical. And the fact that you recognize the importance of reading to your children, I commend you for. It's something that I try to let parents know all the time. Please read to your children. Let them hear the beauty of the language, the magic of the language, how things come alive to a whole different level and in a whole different way when heard aloud. When read on a page, it's different.
Oh yeah, I mean and it can just be such a fun thing to do. I mean, so if you're having a hard time having a conversation with your teenager, start reading a book with them. I mean, my daughter and I, we had a great time. We were reading The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents by Terry Pratchett, which is just a hilarious retelling of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And it was recently made into a movie. You know, if you need more reason to read it with your kids. And there is the most hilarious description of the rat's vision of what their dream island where they're going to live is, and the cat's interpretation of the rat's interpretation of things is it was just a perfect moment. And my daughter and I, we had this just fantastic, just moment of comedy together reading this hilariously funny book. And that it was just great. And yeah, I read with my daughter through when she started high school. I still read with my son. He's in fifth grade, and it's really lovely. And some nights you're like, oh my god, the last thing in the world I want to do right now is read to my kid. I'm tired. They're tired. Do I have to do this? And we do it, and it's great. Even if it's just a paragraph or two, we read together, and it's a nice connection at the end of the day. And we're connecting over something that I love, and that I'm hoping that they'll then love.
And I know you believe this too. It's not only that the parents read to the kids, but let the kids read to the parents as well.
I think what's great is when my son brings me the books that he wants to read, or when my daughter, like I would bring out books and have her pick out things. And I think, there's also being open to them wanting to share things with you that aren't necessarily what you want to be shared with. I have watched my share of little YouTube shorts, or watched, read, crazy things that I'm sort of like, I don't know why we're reading this together, but let's read it together. We'll learn about this. I think that it's been really exciting for my kids to feel like they're sharing something that they know with me. I think, it's very easy as a parent to get into sort of that teacher mode where you're just saying, well, here's what I know, and I'm going to just, give you my knowledge. But to have them be able to come back to you and say, well, here's what I know. Let me share something that I just learned. It's very empowering for them. And it may not even be something that you don't know, but to let them have that moment is really cool also.
And you hit that critical word, empowerment. And every
Yeah.
kid needs that feeling. Yeah, as
Yeah.
we
I mean,
do.
definitely. I mean, I remember being like so like having all the wind taken out of my sails when I was so excited to share with my friend back in college. I had discovered this singer who I thought was just the best, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, you've got to hear this!" And she was like, "Of course, I've already heard that." And it was just like the biggest letdown because here I was sharing my like perfect treasure with you. And I think that like that experience for kids when they like come home with a school project, or they read something, or they like did something, in school, to have them come home and they're just so excited to share it with you, to give them that moment of just saying, like, oh wow, like that's so cool. And I think, I try to put those kinds of moments in my books. I like writing about imperfect parents who are trying their best, and I like to show both the failures and those moments of generosity when a parent does find that moment. In Wayward Creatures, where his mom, makes him a little plate of apples and honey because it was Rosh Hashanah, and they don't do anything special. They're not going, to temple or anything like that. But, she tries to put that out there, and he rejects her because he's mad at her. And then that becomes something that then, like, he's just struggling with. But, I think you have, like, I love that the mom gave him the space to reject her, to have his own emotions, but, that she did try to put that out there. Those moments of connection when you're reaching out, and then also the moments where he's sort of reaching out and sharing with her things. Those are important moments in the book for me.
You drew from your mom soul, because it's difficult, I'm sure, for any parent to not be so directly, um, I don't want to say dictatorial, because that has a very harsh sounding to it, but directional. Take this and do this with it, or I expect you to do this with it. And being able to give up some of that locus of control is not the easiest thing to do, but it's the wisest thing to do. Wisdom doesn't necessarily always come with all of our actions, but what you
No,
say is very true.
no, my mom definitely has she's always been someone who's been interested in both being interested in she was always excited to be a parent. She was my Girl Scout leader. She was excited to go on adventures with me, and to explore the world. And I think that she was always interested in hearing whatever I had to say, and that's why I love talking, and I think I also love sharing with my kids and being excited about their lives. She was definitely that role model for me.
And that's special when you have that.
She's always the first reader for my books, and I always value having her excited voice behind me.
Yeah, that's got to be a boost for you.
Definitely.
Now, in an NCTE press release honoring you as the recipient of the Charlotte Huck Award for Outstanding Fiction for Children in 2023 for your book, Wayward Creatures, as I said before, one of my new favorites, you stated that, quote, "It's a dream to have this book recognized as having the potential to transform children's lives by inviting compassion, imagination, and wonder, and by an organization of professionals whose job is to do the same. Thank you to the National Council of Teachers of English and all the English teachers spreading the joy of reading to children around the country," unquote. Now, it seems to me that you share with NCTE and all of us English teachers the mission to spread the joy of reading to our fellow writers, aspiring writers, and students of writing who are listening, as well as those of us who instruct writing. Please let all of us know the importance that reading has for writers of the various genres and purposes.
Well, I think that reading is critical. I mean, if you want to write, you have to be reading, and you have to be reading a lot and widely. I didn't quite realize when I went to my MFA program how just fundamental and powerful. So Bennington's motto is kind of, I think it's an unofficial motto, but it's read 100 books, write one, and you do read 100 books in the program, and that is it's so important to because you don't even know what's already out there until you start reading. How do you even know what you want to write or what's a possibility in writing? I remember one of the things that led me to want to write for kids was I started reading right around the time when the reading YA, when the Prince Award came out, which was really in the beginning of the 2000s. There was YA writing before that, but that was when the award came out, and I started reading all of the award winners. And what astounded me about early uh, that those books that I was reading where they were all so strange. They did not fit the definition of what I thought a book should be. One of the books had all these little zines cut into it, like little magazines that the character had written. Monster is written part as a screenplay, part as a diary, and then it has part pictures copied into it from like security cameras because the narrator is a filmmaker, and so it's sort of inherent in the story to have all these different pieces in it. Reading a book like Speak, which, the character doesn't actually speak in the whole, for the book, and had this incredibly insouciant voice, though, in sort of her narration of her life and telling her story. Seeing all those possibilities, I had no idea that that could even be called a book. And then, going to my MFA program and having my mind expanded in all these different ways with sort of international authors, reading Italo Calvino and sort of discovering, just different forms. He has one book which is just a character redescribing the same city over and over again, but it's a different city every time he describes it. And that's the book. And it's brilliant and amazing. And so I think, you have to read to sort of figure out how you want to write. You have to read to figure out what is narrative, what are the possibilities here. You read Borges, a story like The Olive, and it seems completely insane, but it works, and it's sort of it changes your sort of understanding of what even is a story, and how can we embrace telling different narratives, and expressing our ideas in different ways. So that's the importance of reading. It opens your mind to the wealth of possibilities that are already out there and gives you the opportunity to say, well, then what about this? I think it opens up the possibilities for you as a writer. And I think it also goes to that piece we were talking about earlier about curiosity. How do you know you don't want to write a novel in verse unless you've read a novel in verse and really know what it is? How do you know you don't like comic books until you've read a bunch? How do you know, you don't like science fiction if you've never read a science fiction book? How do you know you don't like romantasy if you've never read a romantasy? And maybe you don't. Maybe you're going to pick up a romantasy and be like, this isn't for me. But I think that it's an exciting possibility, and that's the gift of the public library is it's a no strings attached kind of relationship. You have so many books at your fingertips. You can explore anything and anywhere you want to go, and it's all available to you. The most amazing thing I've discovered through my public library is an app called Libby, which allows you to take out audiobooks. And so instead of listening to music whenever I exercise, I listen to books. Um, and I just explore, whatever's available now. I'll read that. Like, this looks interesting. I'll just check it out. And it's an amazing way to get to know new genres, new authors, new ways of telling stories, and that's the power of reading. It opens the possibilities, the whole universe.
Is there a teacher or a professor who has inspired you the most to write, or maybe an individual who's not a professional? And what lessons or perspectives did they emphasize?
Well, I think, the first person who ever made me feel like I had that writing was a possibility for me was a professor I had in college, an extremely famous writer who I had the, just dumb luck of asking if I could audit his fiction class, Jim Shepard. He's an adult fiction writer, brilliant short fiction and novelist. And he was sort of like, you're doing this. Like, this is a story. And I was like, really? So, like, okay, I can write. Um, but I think, it goes even farther back than that. I was going through a middle school yearbook for some reason one afternoon, and I found that my English teacher in middle school, who I didn't even remember, had written down, "I can't wait to read your first novel," in her, like, sort of yearbook message to me. And it made me see that, like, it is that little encouragement all along the way. Every teacher, who stood behind me and said, "This is great," who said, "Yeah, you can do this." Um, and then, people who are just friends. So, one of my good friends, as you mentioned, a quote from 2 E.T. Sutherland. We've been friends since high school, and she was one of the first people who said to me, "You can do this." And so she was a huge supporter to me. And I think also, my family and my mom and my husband, who's an English teacher. Um, they've inspired me to just keep going, and especially because there's a lot of rejection in being an author, and I think there's a lot of just having to sit down and do the work. The real work of writing a novel is the actual work of sitting there and writing the novel, and it doesn't magically appear. It comes from hours and hours of writing and rewriting and revising and rethinking and reimagining, and to have people who are going to be honest with you about that, and then also be encouraging of you in doing that. Those are the real lessons. That it's hard work, but to have people who believe in you and who are willing to support you through that is really great. And I'm very lucky to have those people in my life.
It's nice of you to acknowledge them too.
Oh, well, they've done a lot for me.
Now, sometimes authors will start out researching a book or getting an idea for a book, and there's a pattern that begins to develop. While others, every book is a different experience. Every book comes from a different place. Every book happened in a different way. Uh, does that happen with you? Do the processes vary each time, or does the genesis of the book start in one place and then maybe branch out from there?
They've definitely all come from different places. I think that usually I have a lot of ideas. I'm someone who, like, a lot of ideas will poke up in my mind. As perhaps has become obvious, I'm very curious. I run around and look at different shiny objects and get very excited about things. I've always wanted to write a book, for example, as you were talking about giant squids before. I've always wanted to write a book about a giant squid, but I don't have that story yet, because even though this idea, like, I want giant squid book, it hasn't found any, like, idea friends that have turned into a book yet. It's just sort of floating out there waiting to meet some friends. But the books that I've written are books where it's like, okay, I wanted to write a book about an owl. I love an owl. And I also learned about falconry, and I wanted to write a book about falconry. And I've worked sort of in and around foster care for years. I took a year off between college and law school to work at a residential treatment center for foster kids. and now I work in the family courts. And but those ideas on their own really didn't amount to anything until I started putting them together and was like, wow, okay, no, this is a story. This is a book that's going to come together. And that book actually became Of a Feather. And that really is that's the only, magic that's been consistent through the books, is this sort of idea of like, okay, I have this one thing meets this other piece, and they sort of accrete, and become something that looks like a novel. I had, like, a vision in, I think the most coherent vision I had was for No Safety in Numbers. My husband and I had gone to see a late showing of a film. There's a mall actually just north of the New Jersey border, the Palisades Park Plaza, which is a gigantic mall. I believe it's the eighth biggest mall in the country, or maybe it's even bigger. But the movie theater is on the top floor. It's a four-story mall. It's 5 million retail square feet. And we were coming down on these escalators. And as you go down the escalators, you can sort of see all the other floors. And we were there so late that all of the stores were closed. The entire lower level of the mall was all shut down. And there were just these little, every, like, 20 feet, there was a fluorescent lighting. But as we were going down, I saw there were kids. The mall is open 24 hours, and there were kids running around in the mall, just hanging out there. And it was like, oh my gosh, what a playground. I mean, I'm from New Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl. I went to a lot of malls growing up. They were very important, foundational parts of my childhood. And so I guess it just struck a chord. I was like, wow, okay, I feel a whole novel, like, right here, this vision of like teenagers in the dark in a mall. But it was, then I had to put all the other pieces with that. How are they going to be in the mall? Why are they in the mall? Which mall? My mall is set in a fictional version of that mall, but it is that idea of, like, you have like that sort of vision, but then there have to be other pieces that come together, and that's where the research piece comes in. Sometimes you have to start writing before you even know what you need to start researching.
Now, we use technology for researching, we use it for other things as well. And I know there are some writers who welcome the technology while others use it with a bit of restraint. And artificial intelligence is now moving its way into the the uh, the background, and maybe getting a little more prominent than it should. So I guess I'm asking you two questions. What do you see as the role for technology to help today's writers? And do you think that artificial intelligence is doing what it was intended to do?
Well, as to the first piece, you know, as I've mentioned throughout the our conversation, I've learned about so many things that I never would have had access to without the internet, and the research that I've done through technology. Just the ability to, if I want to watch a webcam of a certain bird, in in Indonesia, I can find that. If I want to watch, somebody's lecture on, how forest fires impact soil regeneration, I found that lecture. I was able to watch a restorative justice process, which I would never have had access to because they are confidential. I couldn't sit in one, but I can watch this one I found on YouTube. So the potential for getting out there, the ability for us to even do this interview through video technology, it's astounding, and it's wonderful. And something like Libby, which allows me to listen to audiobooks, I would have had to go to the library, get a CD, have a CD player that functioned, find the batteries. That's such a gift. It's a gift for today's writers. It's a gift for today's readers. And it's astounding. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, I find really, really problematic, and it scares me. Possibly it's because I'm, the generation raised on, the Terminator. Um, and so AI was always presented as something that was unstoppable and coming to kill you. And that's sort of where my fears lie with that. And also just, in terms of, as a writer, the joy of writing is playing with words. The joy of writing is working and thinking and digging until you get the sentence right, until you find the word that you meant. And artificial intelligence is never going to help you do that. Artificial intelligence is going to maybe, give you a cheat code. You can skip ahead, but you're not getting at that clarity. You're not getting down to what you meant. You're not figuring out what's at the center of the stuff your character is carrying around. You're just finding a thing that could be in there. But if you're not willing to sit down and do that work yourself, um, of digging for those words, of figuring out, okay, wait, where is this plot going? That is the creative process. That is what it means to be a human artist. And I don't know why it would be attractive to hand that process over to a machine. I'm not interested in that, and that's certainly not something that I use when I write, or am really that attracted to using. And that's aside from sort of all of the legal copyright pieces, which feel really sad and hurtful.
It's also put a lot of artists to a position where they won't post things anymore because the bots can take it and adapt it and change it, rearrange it, enhance it, and basically make it their own.
Yeah, it's really a complicated time. I actually wrote my master's at Bennington. You have to do sort of this master's lecture, and I wrote my master's lecture on Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, and how there's actually two different endings to that book. There's the version of the book of the play that everyone reads, where sort of the mom leaves and she goes off on her own. She leaves her children. And then the reason why I wrote this was because I had a version of the book which had this second ending where she doesn't leave and she decides to stay to be with her kids because that's what a mom would do. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, why are there two endings to this play? And they were both written by Ibsen. And the reason was there was no copyright protection in Europe at the time he wrote that play. And the German actress who was hired to play that character at its German premiere didn't think that that was what a mother would do. And so she was like, I want a different ending. And he basically said, instead of, letting some other person write the ending, I'll write your ending. And then he wrote a review of his own play, scathing review, saying that this is terrible. This is not what I intended. This is not my ending. But when you don't have the law to sort of protect that creative process, I guess you do what you have to do. And, I thought that was fascinating, but I think that's where we are right now with the artificial intelligence. We're in this situation where the law and society and sort of our practices have not really found a way to deal with what's going on. But for myself, it's something that I'm not really interested in participating in.
Off the record, I personally am happy to hear that. I tell everyone it's a tool, it's not a destination. It's just one little thing to use. Do not have it replace you as an artist. It's not an artist.
I mean, I have not seen this yet, but I've heard that it's being put into publishing contracts. Your work must not come in any way from artificial intelligence. So it's really something where if that becomes a tool you're reliant upon, you're really limiting what you can do with what you write.
Yes. And maybe it's time that does become part of the norm rather than the exception. And we'd like
Yeah.
the creativity to come from someone's soul rather than from a microchip.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the one thing that I've learned being an author are there are no shortcuts. I think there used to be this idea I had in my own head that was, well, that first draft really has the magic stuff in it. And if you tinker with it, all the magic's going to fall right out the bottom. And I think there's this idea that like you could put something to AI and it's going to create this genius thing, and that's perfect. But the real work of writing and the real work of putting a story together is, the revision process where you take, that first draft, that playground where you've created these ideas and these characters and sort of let them do that first draft of things that you want them to do and realize, well, wait a minute, that isn't what I want to do. I mean, I've written whole novels and then thrown them out because it took me writing that whole first draft to realize, oh wait, no, the book I want to write is over here. and
Yeah.
and so I think that you using artificial intelligence to sort of make that happen faster or make the process shorter isn't really going to help you anyway, because you have to go through the process of writing to get to the end result of a written work.
Let me take a little different direction. Writer's block. You ever get writer's block? And if you do, how do you solve it?
I think that what when I've had moments where I've gotten to a book and there's no scene there or there's no ideas, um, there have definitely been times where that's happened. And I think what I've done then is I've actually gone for a walk. I think that's one the most I've seen many authors recommend that. It is a real cure for writer's block, is going out, especially if you can walk with a dog, or if you walk and look for an animal, something really random that's going to take your mind out of your book, because there is a way you can go for a walk and just spend the whole time thinking about how you couldn't write anything that morning. But especially when I was getting started, I used to have two small dogs, and they were really hard to keep focused on anything. I had two leashes going in other directions, and so I'd come back from the walk and be like, "Wait, what was I doing?" And I would have forgotten my writer's block, and I'd be like, "Oh wait, I had an idea." Like it just sort of appeared out of nowhere. Um, so I think that's definitely one way. I think sometimes you need to play. Go to a different genre. I also love to sketch. I love to sing. I love to act. I'll do something else for a little while, and then when I come back to the page, it feels fresh. It feels new. I'm suddenly like, my creativity's back because I haven't been using it for a while. It's sort of built up. It's kind of like static electricity. If you leave it there long enough, I guess it sort of makes itself, grows itself. Maybe less like static electricity and more like mold. I'm not sure, but uh, so I think those are two things. Sometimes I've gone and I'll start doing just writing exercises. If I don't know what I want my character to do, I'll just start writing diary entries for them, and I'll give them, to actually get to know a character. I started giving her diary entries that I wanted her to write, and so I just gave her a topic, and I would sit for, like, I time myself. I was only allowed to write for 15 minutes, and I would just sit there, and I couldn't stop writing. I would just write in pencil, just keep writing whatever the stream of consciousness that this character had. And then it wasn't for the book, it wasn't plot based, but just writing that for a couple of days got me into the character so well that suddenly it was like a plot emerged, in just doing these random exercises. So I think those would be some good ways to sort of get yourself out of writer's block.
Okay. Now, I know that we have a lot of aspiring authors listening today. And is there a bit of advice that you might share with one of or more of them who's maybe trying to get their work published? When you meet a writer who wants to get published, they are very eager to learn any secret whatsoever, or any way or any angle. Any encouragement maybe you could give them?
Well, I think, in terms of, there is no secret. I think that, you know, getting published really is a matter of writing the best piece of writing that you can create, and working on that writing until it really is the best thing you can create. And I think that at the point where you're like, this is as good as I can take it, make sure you have a critique partner or a critique group who you can give it to, and then get their feedback on it, because somebody else's eyes are always going to help you see new things. And make sure they're people who you trust, and people who are going to be kind to you, and who are going to say things in a loving and supportive way. Um, and you know they'll help you figure out how to make your book better, and then you go through that whole process again. You work on the book until it's the best thing you can, and you give it maybe to a different set of critique readers until you get it to that point where you're like, wow, I'm really proud of this book sings. And then you go out and you try and find yourself an agent. There are some publishers which accept unagented submissions, but if you want to be published traditionally, which is the only thing that I know anything about, most publishers require an agent, and you find an agent who's a good agent, who's not going to charge you for reviewing your manuscript, because reputable agents don't do that. And those agents, the ones there are going to be a lot of agents who reject you. I was rejected by agents, but the agent who accepts you, they're someone who loves your work. They're someone who's going to be an advocate, and that's really what an agent is. There's someone who's out there who's excited about you, who's excited about your writing, wants to make you successful. And they help you find the right editor. And the editor who falls in love with your book, that's all they want, is to help you make your best book and help you make you feel successful. So I think that, in terms of wanting to get published, want to write a great book first. The publishing will come once you have that book that you're in love with, that you're excited about, because your excitement will come through on the page, and that'll get the agent excited, and that'll find an editor and get them excited about the book. Because that's really the only thing you have any control over, also, is your words on the page and the work that you're doing. You can't guarantee that anything's going to be published, but you can guarantee that you're putting something out there that you're really excited about and proud of.
I think you just put a smile on at least one or two faces out there and gave some reassurance and hope that having that really good piece is probably the biggest of the hurdles. Once that's in place, then the other things can be pursued. And that's good advice.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Now, for those who wish to learn more about you or invite you to speak at their school or community event or connect with their school, how may they best reach out to you?
It's definitely over my website. You can also find me on Instagram. And I usually make a lot of sort of posts about my cats and about other things that are going on in my life on Instagram. But also the contact page on my Facebook page is the best way to get in touch with me.
Dayna Lorentz, thank you so much for taking an author's journey with us today. Your insights into the process of writing have been most helpful, and your sense of humor is indeed delightful. Furthermore, the depth and generosity of spirit contained in your message seem to elevate and inspire those who read your books. Thank you for bringing nature to the forefront, especially in this day of technology and what I call the excessive pavement of open land.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This has been such a lovely conversation. And, just get out there, read books, and look for birds. The magic is right there.
Well, that concludes our journey for this day. Tune in again for more conversations with more authors of interest. For An Author's Journey, I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.